Welcome to the May 22nd bhyve production user call. We have Andrew, Jan, Richard, Hans, Harry, and myself, Michael, so far. And Jan has made some interesting discoveries on PkgBase, although that's a little off topic for the bhyve call. It seems that package-J is now working for a jail, but it does require a few items to properly get, say, certificates resolved. Jan, anything to add to that beyond what you've added so far?
Maybe the link.
Ah, do you have a link in chat? Drop it in there in context, if you will. So, as you do that, this is interesting and came up with a colleague just yesterday. We get a Chinese lesson here. There's an article on why is my virtualized Windows so ridiculously slow when choosing the host CPU profile, which basically passes through most, if not all, aspects of the CPU to a guest. And that's where Hans, perhaps you have some insights on this, and let's see if the translate will kick in. Maybe it won't, maybe it will. It did earlier. But the summary of the meat of it is there in English. Not in the mood. Okay, so, oh, come on. Okay, here we go. So, and Andrew, it sounds like you've encountered some of these issues in production.
Um, I haven't, I don't think I've specifically noticed it, but but I mean, I do use host, so if I can improve the performance of my system, that sounds like a wonderful thing.
Okay, and yeah, indeed, it identified these two flags that cause the performance problems. And scanning through. And Hans, do you have any insights onto into the role of these and how, say, Illumos and FreeBSD might handle them in bhyve?
No, not offhand.
No worries.
Yikes.
I
The
don't understand.
latency spikes are insane.
Do we
I
get
mean,
pretty pictures with that? Let's see if I my translate's
Scroll
not.
down to host AIDA 64 for the first time.
Uh,
Those numbers are correct. That's a factor what, 12, 15 latency increase.
And first occurrence of what letters?
First run here, you don't have it translated if you click in your address bar in the upper right corner.
Oh, there it is.
And then
Oh, great text. Yep.
there it is.
Before it
Click that
automatically.
and click on translate to English.
Yes. Well, we've got mostly Germans here. We can do that. Come on, little browser. Here we go. English.
Yeah, it's still loading.
It's trying. There we go. Okay. Kobayashi.
Well, some combinations of flag result in massive overheads with very expensive mitigations, and you can only must not select threads which trigger one mitigation without also exposing the feature which allows you to effectively perform a less impactful workaround. So yeah. And if you now scroll down,
Yes, and Richard asked what hardware. Let's see if there's. I
these are
hope they're
the
specific on the
CPU
CPU.
feature sets for Ivy Bridge and so on.
Yeah.
But if you go down,
Down. What? And give me a
until you
keyword to
see
search.
host, either host. These are all reasonable performance numbers. Now go down.
Conclusion.
Or you already passed that.
Probably.
Host.
Host. Let's see.
Suddenly, instead of almost 200, you see over 2000 nanosecond latency for memory access, and throughput goes down to about 3 point something gigabytes a second instead of 5 dot something gigabytes a second.
This line?
Yeah.
Okay.
But what makes me a bit wary is that the 0 MB a second of L1 cache write bandwidth are unbelievable.
Hmm.
This means something went wrong because it's definitely not no bandwidth. Or not, less than half a megabyte is also unbelievable. That wouldn't be a L1 cache, that would be a floppy drive.
Um,
Welcome, Eva.
just a moment ago, you had a page open where they basically said they can trace that to 2 individual flags.
Yeah, so that was a summary I pulled out of it. I
Yes.
threw it in the document for context, and I will add Eva to the document.
Yes, it's MD here and
So
slash L.
is this latency specific to using a Windows environment in the VM, or is it general to
Yes,
any?
Yes.
Okay.
it's that apparently when you have the MD, clear, and flush LD, L1 data cache flags, it triggers significant performance problems because the combination of those two enables a very expensive mitigation.
Do any of you have a system that supports these features? What CPU revisions do you actually need to have those flags?
Let's see if I do E5 dash and see if they give at least what they're running E5. Ah, I
It's a
might
bit
have
old,
something.
but
It's a bit
yes.
old, but yeah, let's see.
But something like that.
Yeah.
If you pass through all the flags of a more modern system, which doesn't need the software mitigation anymore because the hardware problem was fixed, maybe then you won't see that impact. So if you run, I don't know, Gen 4 Zen based CPU, maybe it just won't trigger the performance pathologies or something like that.
In theory, this is
Because
if all that's needed is not passing these 2 flags through, then that is something that you guys either is already
it's
doing or should be doing.
all those mitigations are needed for correctness, and you have to bite the bullet.
They're always needed in a guest, or they just needed in a host.
I have
Yeah,
most of the
okay.
same flags as that first host there. Yeah, I think I have a very similar CPU.
Um,
I've never experienced something like this. I guess it's just different when it must be this specific to Windows
yep.
factor
And
about it that
it doesn't mean that
changes
Windows
it all.
becomes unusable, just that it runs at a significantly reduced performance.
Mm, interesting.
And do they specify how they are measuring cache performance? I don't recall Windows being super forward on that. And on Jan, as you point out, that's a bit suspicious.
Well, I mean, if you're emulating the environment, surely the cache would be simulated so like you could do
You,
like a strace or something on the actual process running it
Hmm.
to see how it's like interacting through that. No?
I assume they're querying the reported cache size and then do some kind of benchmark which will perfectly fit in cache. Benchmark
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
Maybe even while pinning the thread to the vCPU. So unless you have the thread migrating to different host logical CPUs with different caches doing the benchmarks, it just shouldn't
Yeah,
migrate.
I'm thinking you're looking at this from the wrong perspective. So just because someone found that this stuff makes things slow, we should first understand what these things do and whether they
Yep.
are needed. And so do we have Intel documentation? I see something from the Linux kernel, a document about L1 deflushing. I figure that's this feature.
Mm-hmm.
It could be something else. And the other is called MD clear. And I understand they were running KVM and trying to disable it using KVM for the measurements. Yeah, this is something. Microarchitectural data sampling mitigation. Intel also has a side about this. It's interesting.
And to answer my question, I see he's using CPU-Z, which is a pretty popular tool. Anyway, that stood out.
I mean, if you
It's
get the CPU ID masking stuff in that Loomis has and make that useful in a way, and you can just play with these bits and disable them and see what happens.
Mhm.
These are actually needed to be included in the gas if the host CPU has them. That would probably be a bad idea. And worst case, you're just out of luck for buying Intel.
Hmm. I'd be curious if, what the baseline references with other guest operating systems would look like. Is this a uniquely Windows-oriented problem or across the board?
Yeah, probably.
Hans, have you had a moment to work on CPU ID now that the code is in a license or an unambiguous license?
Well, the license has been resolved.
Exactly.
Not including the stuff that's in Illumis, but I haven't been able to continue for a variety of personal reasons that kept me busy.
No worries.
Recently.
Okay. Anything else on this topic? Any insights from Eva? Owen, Fuji. Welcome, additional guest Juan and Fuji.
Hi everyone. Nice to meet you all. I was invited here by
Patrick, was it?
sorry, my apologies. I'm
No worries.
at a loss for words right now.
No worries.
God, I forgot his name.
Patrick H, maybe, or
Yes, Patrick. Patrick.
yes.
Yes.
Welcome.
Yeah. So I'm a heavy user of a TrueNAS core. Very, very interested in FreeBSD, and of course, very dismayed by by recent developments.
Mhm.
I learned about the Seabolt project, and I reached out to him. I thought he was leading the Seabolt project, and I asked uh, if there was a way to get involved and perhaps contribute. I wanted to become a little bit more acquainted with the effort, and he put me in touch with you guys, and asked you to forward the invitation. You and I have talked a little bit,
Okay.
Mike,
Yeah.
and Twitter a while ago,
Yeah.
but of course I exited out of that.
I remember Twitter.
Yes. And well, so here I am.
Okay, welcome. This is not yet a hotbed of ZVault development. Of course, we're curious collectively, and a bunch of us are focusing on TrueNAS features in raw FreeBSD. So that's a conversation to have in parallel.
Yes, of course.
Eva, welcome. I know that you and Alexei have discussed some about open power, and I poked OSU, OSL. Do you have any news to share?
Let's see. So the access has been set up, and Alex has been doing a certain amount of steps, including setting up FreeBSD on the power system and so forth. I don't have an update since like last week though, so we would need to get a ping from him directly. Let me see if
No
he's on
worries.
Telegram.
Cool. Yep. Thank you, and thanks for pushing that through. Do you have any insights on the Windows performance issue above, or anything else to discuss?
I do not use Windows, so I cannot say. As far as L1 cache stuff on Intel systems, I do have some benchmarking and performance analysis stuff that's specific to tracking how the cache layers work on modern Xeons that I was working on directly with Intel a couple years ago. So I can dig into some of those tools and talk about it later.
Okay, well, there's the nudge from this article, and any and all transparency is a good thing there. So thank you. I appreciate that. And Fuji, welcome. Do you have any topics to discuss?
No, sorry. I'm just listening in and
Okay,
learning.
no worries at all. So I think this came up from a conversation with Alexei as I was closing tabs, and there was this bit about EFI memory attributes. Uh, I thought I'd document it here for posterity, and then I closed the tab. But there is that. The thought was maybe it's useful for retrieving video BIOS, but if you care, great. If not, I have it preserved here. And then Emil is hoping to drop in with a virtiofs update. It sounds like he will be at BSDCan in Ottawa and is making progress on virtiofs support, I believe, as a guest in FreeBSD. And so watch this space. And let's see, Jan, you have found more about that performance bit. Let's take a peek. And hopefully that's not the same article that got us there in the first place, because it was originally from Reddit. Let's see.
I'm not 100% sure,
My
but
blog,
I
yes,
found
that's
this
where it came from. Correct.
patch
Go ahead, Harry.
seems to
Yeah, I
affect
wanted to
this
drop the other
L1.
link.
Yeah, Harry, you had something?
Copy and paste
Yeah, I
there.
just posted it in the chat. It seems like this has been an issue previously for FreeBSD hosts themselves. So maybe the patch that is linked, I sent the ASC file, not the actual patch itself, but um, the patches laid out here seem to address the caching problem. So maybe it could be used to implement a fix for bhyve Windows host. It seems like they've already come across this problem a while ago.
If I understood the reporting correctly, it isn't that there is an issue with bhyve needing a fix. It's that the mitigation using these features may not be needed in a guest. As in, bhyve passes the CPU through in hardware as is, which causes the guest operating system to apply mitigations which it doesn't have to.
Mm.
Or it's still needed, and then the performance just has to suck if you want a secure virtual guest
Yeah,
operating system.
I think one of the things that came up on, I'll see if I can find the link to it, is that the L1 cache flushing feature doesn't work if you have like hyper-threading also enabled. And you need to do a like an unconditional force allow the L1 flush for it to actually work without the hyper-threading enabled as well. I'll see if I can find the forum post I was just looking at.
Oh, interesting.
I don't really understand the specifics of here. I think is maybe it's already been linked. This one. Yeah, it's already been linked.
Been linked where?
In the chat just higher up.
Oh, so
Chat
okay,
posted
cool.
it about
Thank you.
a minute ago.
And someday someone should do a deep dive into virtualization with and without hyper-threading and all the bizarre things you may discover, which of course is an open-ended rabbit hole, but still, okay. Use this.
This is specifically for a Linux kernel, not a FreeBSD or BSD based system, but I think most of it would probably carry over.
And do we know if this is supported on, say, Lumos and FreeBSD? Cool. Science. That's just interesting because it may provide some insights. Okay, let's see. Emil hasn't rolled in. Yuan, you are using TrueNAS Core and bhyve. What guest operating systems are you using?
I'm using, I have three different VMs in TrueNAS Core. At the moment, all of them FreeBSD, FreeBSD 13, FreeBSD 14. Another one is pfSense with a PCI pass-through for 3 NICs. And pfSense is, of course, FreeBSD 14.
Oh, it's up to 14?
Yes, it's
Great.
14 current.
Okay. Thank you.
At times I've had a couple of Linux VMs as well. Alma Linux, Ubuntu, and I have um, a large collection of jails, all of them 13, 13.2, 13.3, no, 13.3, 4, and 5, with various different services. What else? What else?
Also under the TrueNAS containers?
Correct. Yes,
see.
also on under TrueNAS Core with IO cage. I've tried as much as I can to keep the pristine nature of the TrueNAS Core host OS and do everything in whatever virtualized environment may be appropriate for whatever it is that I want to do.
And have you given zVault a try?
Not yet. I've not had a chance. I wouldn't say this host is overloaded. I think it's actually been performing quite well because it has about, I want to say, about 20 jails running databases, web servers, GitLab instance, GitLab runners, um, the the router, which is that VM, which is running, of course, 24/7. It's running Samba services for a few clients here at home doing backups, CFS replication, all that stuff, and it still, I think, still has pretty a decent amount of resources to spare. So I should be able to boot up a new VM and try TrueNAS, try zVault, but I'd be doing so virtualized
As
with
a VM. Interesting.
yeah.
Well,
Currently I don't have a hardware where to put it.
I see.
So I'm happy to do that if you would like me to try.
I will never discourage science. I wish them the best. I have spent a decade in close proximity to FreeNAS, TrueNAS, so I'm a both helpful and unhelpful person on the subject.
I understand.
Other topics, questions, ideas, concerns. I was hoping to start the call with a nifty new ARM Ampere system, but maybe I'll get that wrapped up today. It does have the motherboard ready to be mounted. Let's see. Harry, can you share what you virtualize if you're interested? No pressure.
Yeah, so I currently virtualize v7 like emulation for I think it's the Raspberry Pi Pico 2. No, the first Pico. And also AV, so 64, 64. Raspberry Pi board is 02, I think. I'm playing around with like writing a libc implementation. So I need to do a lot of these. I'm targeting architectures first because it's what I have on my like host machine, so I can actually run it. But I'm finding that playing around with ARM is a lot easier than doing anything on Intel AMD 64x86 machines, and I'm very, very thankful for that.
Interesting.
Yeah, the 02 is what I mean. The 02 is I think I can pull up. I actually just ordered physical ones so I can start playing with the bare metal.
So you've
Or-
been running a simulator or what? Did you say like
No, so
C7 or
I'm
something or
going
what?
I have a like host, so I
Uh-huh.
find that running these uh so I think running these things is a lot easier. Like if I was on it, I have two machines. I tried to do this on my FreeBSD box that is x86-64, and I
Hmm.
actually came into a lot of issues with it. Um, I think it's because I'm not using any like well distributed like kernel codes. I'm not taking any like time and user space really. I'm essentially just like booting a kernel to run these syscall tests that I'm writing. So it became an issue me struggling with the cross architecture um like compilation of these binaries. So I decided to start doing the emulations on our machine, not doing pass through because they're slightly different architectures, but same instruction sets. So well, same subset of instructions.
Can you describe
So
that host
coming
hardware?
Yeah, so I run two machines. So I do x86-64
Yes.
FreeBSD box, and then I've got a Apple Silicon
Oh, okay.
M2. I tried to reach out to Kyle Evans to see if I could jump on trying to get the FreeBSD port to Apple Silicon going with him, but I don't think I reached out to him at the right time on the ISC channel because that'd be a fun little project. And I basically read all of the kernel code by this point. I'm just trying to structure the implementation of what I'm working on at the same time. So yeah, but that was a little sidetrack. My bad.
So on the M2, are you using something like UTM?
No, I'm doing
What are you
it
using?
just through Camu and QE. I don't know how to say it. QEMU. They have. So I usually go. There's two like types of command I'm using. So there's Camu with user space, like kind of like pre-enabled.
Mm-hmm.
So but that only supports what is it, Spark 64, I think.
Oh, okay.
Um, uh, with BSD, with the BSD like kernel underneath the hood. Um, and then the other is just like a Chemu system ARch64 or ARM v7 to, and then you can pass in the actual like CPU that's on these like two Raspberry Pi boards in the like machine and CPU flags. So you can get like as close as to playing with the actual board themselves as you're going to get without the board. So it's been quite nice. It's very tight feedback loop, but I
Is
don't
that
know. I feel
documented
like
anywhere? Can you share that
yeah,
that
the
workflow?
QEMU docs are pretty
Okay.
descriptive. They have the flag if you just do QEMU or your specific architecture system, whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
dash machine help, I think is the argument. It will print out all of the different machines you could be using. So, or you emulating, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that kind of guides you. Most of the flags have that help arg argument to them, so you can really go through it. Or the man pages is very well descriptive as well.
That's great. Hmm. Yeah, I hadn't heard of examples of RPI development on Apple Silicon. And it's great to hear that you found a way that it's doing what you need.
Yeah, the only issue is that the Apple Silicon implementation of the ARM64 instruction set is like just slightly wrong. Well, not wrong, it slightly differs from the
Uh-huh.
standard in
As
some really
in,
strange places, which has been like a frustration of mine because if I want to run the binaries on my host machine, I need to change how I reference certain functions in the assembly calls. But then if I want to run it on a more standardized ARM implementation to revert those changes, it's quite
um,
frustrating.
are you referencing the fact that macOS has a different ABI from FreeBSD on
Yeah.
ARM64?
It's just from if you
Yeah,
go through the ARM AEBI on there, they have like a GitHub with all their different
yeah, Apple
specifications.
doesn't follow
It's
that.
just slightly different.
Hmm.
Um, but
Apple
Apple
has
doesn't
its
really
own
document
ABI.
where it's different, which is the most frustrating part.
Oh,
You
They
are
have like
they
a
do
documenting it
really
or
have their
short.
ABI somewhere on the developer documentation.
Yeah, I looked
I
through
found it
the
in the
Apple
past.
developer documentation for their specific ARM 64 things, and they don't go into a lot of detail. So maybe I just need to look a bit harder. Maybe it's in the SDK root on the actual machine somewhere in a doc file, maybe. But I've managed to figure out most of the differences so that I can
Are you
switch between the
documenting
two
those as you
targets.
go for perhaps the public?
Well, yeah, it's public. The libc implementation is on my Git repo, so uh, but I've not like written any docs about it.
Cool. And I
I think
see
maybe I
some.
should like I I've like mapped out all of the FreeBSD ways that it goes from like the CRT zero entry point to like how all the syscalls are integrating with each other. It's a beautiful system, really.
Hmm.
It's a lot. It's a really, really nice thing to understand. Well, I wouldn't say I fully understand it. I don't think that that will happen, but it's a very beautiful like system. How it all tightly related to each other is it's quite nice.
Okay.
I
Would you
tried reading the Linux implementations of the syscalls and I was terrified. Like I didn't like the order of the syscall numbers.
okay? Would you like
It,
to share your GitHub repo if someone's interested in
yeah,
your
sure.
libc? Sure. That's
Yeah, I've just got the I got to the point where I need to build up the kernel a bit more on my other side of the the, the libc implementation. I've got like zero dependencies, but currently it depends on a soft link to um, the libsystem dynamic library just because of this like I haven't done the CRT entry points of like fully yet. So I need to actually implement the behind the scenes implementations of the this calls in assembly, like your writes, FT opens, that sort of thing. And then I can start getting rid of a lot of more stuff.
hmm.
Unfortunately, Jan, I'm on the M2. Um, so I don't think I can actually partake in the necessary hardware virtualization.
No, then you can't, because that hardware feature wasn't available until VM3, I think.
Oh, I currently have FreeBSD running in a Kemu uh, environment emulating the FreeBSD 14.3 beta 3 and
Yeah.
um
You,
ARM 64, and then I actually have the same version on my x86 machine as
so
well.
yeah, you can run multiple virtual machines with hardware
Mm.
virtualization, but you can't nest them on an M1 or M2 in QEMU.
Yeah.
So if you use one FreeBSD system in a virtual machine
Mm.
as your test machine, and
Yeah.
or as your development machine, and the other as your test machine, you cannot nest them inside each other, but you
Mm.
can use an NFS share or something to move files across.
Mm. Yeah, good point. They could
So,
have like a
or
sort of
you could
shared
go even
drive
crazier
or something.
and do something like reroute to an iSCSI connection or something,
Mm.
or because it's effectively local, something simpler like I don't know, Geom Gate as a poor man's
Yeah.
network storage to
It's one
expose
man's
a
network storage.
VGAF
I
from
like
one
that.
system to the other.
Mm.
So FreeBSD gives you lots of tools here.
Yeah, I think
Or
I'm
you
gonna
could
try
boot
and
with an
yeah, go
NFS
on.
boot.
Mm.
Uh, it won't behave exactly like a real file system. If you tinker a bit with the release images, you can also build a kernel with an embedded so-called MFS, memory file system image, where you have
Mm.
a small UFS image of a few hundred megabytes in up to that size in the kernel,
Mm.
which means you can then boot off that without having to deal with a disk image. Or if you want to live dangerously, you could just take the same raw disk image and attach it to two QEMU virtual machines, and then
Yeah.
you're responsible that there are no two writers, and
Mm.
preferably just readers or one read writer,
I think
because
the difficulty is that I'm not targeting the FreeBSD kernel as the underlying implementation for these. It's like the ultimate goal for the project is two parts. Essentially, it's just a big learning experience for me to do all of this
Mhm.
with no dependencies. So the kernel I'm actually targeting is my own implementation, and
Oh,
I've
okay.
only
You want to run your
implemented.
own bare metal kernel. I understand.
Yeah, so I've only implemented a really bad uh really quick implementation, I should say, of the ISO file system. And I'm still not
Um,
using my own implementation of FAT12 to actually get from the the
mhm.
floppy 16-bit
So
kernel into the proper
one
like
thing
protected mode.
which
But
would be fairly easy to do is to
mm,
implement the U star, so basically the minimal tar,
mm,
and just scan it on boot and then keep an index so that you have a read-only file system as simple as a tar.
mm,
It's not going to be very efficient because you have
no.
the headers interleaved with the files, but with small development system, it doesn't matter. And the nice thing is that you can then boot off a tar archive on a partition,
That is
which
quite a nice
is
thing. But I think
which
if I go all out and ditch BIOS, like BIOS support in the initial stage of development and go straight into like a UFI target, I might be able to get a bit more, what's the
Mhm.
word? A bit more support for file systems
And
through
QEMU may
that.
have a documented
GMU is quite,
configuration
yeah, they do have
which
quite
closely
good
mirrors the
support for
Raspberry
that.
Pi Zero or Zero Two.
They've got exact CPU implementations for both of those devices
Yep.
actually. It's quite well supported on
That's great.
their system.
And for the initial bring up, you don't really have to worry about the performance of hardware virtualization versus emulation, because you will probably crash after a few thousand instructions in the beginning.
Yeah, I have also
Ah,
I literally just today I ordered the two boards in real life so I can they're
do
so
you
cheap.
have a
The
JTAG
power
probe?
cable costs more than say again?
Do you also have a way to hook up a JTAG probe or something like that for hardware debugging?
Yeah, I bought so Raspberry Pi actually supply a like a custom debugger little thing for like very cheap that is compatible with all of their boards. So you can plug into each and every one of their boards and do debugging on an external machine. So I made sure to grab myself one of those.
Yeah.
It's probably where I was going to spend
So
most
the
of my time.
confusing thing is that Raspberry Pis are often used as the JTAG debug probe instead of as the
Good.
target.
Yeah. But I just needed something that wasn't an Apple machine, so that I could test, so I could write a libc implementation that would work across FreeBSD Linux and my own kernel, because they all kind of
Mhm.
follow the syscall design, except Linux has
Yeah.
really gone off the whack with the ordering
Um,
of the syscall numbers. So if I
what you
just make the
could
syscall number definitions customizable, then the libc can be plug and play to any kernel.
do initially, if you're wanting to write your own kernel stuff and so on,
Mm,
is to write a companion over, for example, UART, which would be a system call proxy, so that instead of implementing a local file system, you have
mm,
the UART where you effectively proxy the open read write system calls, or use something like 9p, or even simpler, where you basically
mm,
just have a dedicated server for exactly one client, which is your kernel.
mm.
And then you have open this file, start this file, similar to how ARM semi-hosting works
Yeah,
for
good point.
microcontrollers. That's
I
probably
think
a
so
lot
far it's
easier to
been all right to
implement and may
test.
even be
Yeah,
available via Open OCD. I don't know
I
if
think I'm going
it's
to check that out. That sounds like a
implemented
good
for the
idea.
application
Mm,
se- cores. It may only be implemented for the embedded Cortex M series instead of for the Cortex A series,
mm,
of
mm.
course. But something like that, and you don't have to use a system call instruction as the interface. You could do something like, yeah, serialize it over a serial port or
Well,
whatever
I still need to
reliable
have
connection you
the
have.
syscall being on the libc side. Still needs to use the syscall interface because you can't like directly jump into like interrupts or anything when you're at that point
Well,
in like the
if
boot
you're
cycle.
writing a kernel from scratch,
Yeah, but I don't want to make my libc so off on its own island
yeah,
that it can't be used. And that's one
okay.
thing actually that's quite nice about Apple and FreeBSD is that they share a lot of the same system call numbers. But then, so if, for example,
That's one header.
like one is exit, for example, and zero is the actual syscall
Mhm.
itself, the SVC instruction. But on on Linux, like exit is like right is like 64, for example, and on FreeBSD and Apple, right
Yeah,
is 4. It makes more sense to look at them in the order that you would probably build them,
grow them
and
over
then
time.
Linux is it's like someone ordered them correctly, split them in half, and then shifted them. Does that make sense? There's like all these really
Yeah.
complex syscalls are the first couple of numbers, and then you have all the basic ones towards the end, and then in the middle you've got some
Yeah,
as
well,
well.
it
It's
doesn't
very
really
strange.
matter because it's just a lookup table. It's one
Yeah,
header
but the
of
thing is,
numbers,
if you pass the wrong syscall number into your syscall
and then all hell breaks
instruction, you're
loose
gonna call
because,
the wrong thing,
of
depending
course,
on which kernel is being ran on.
yeah, you have
Um,
to know which kernel you're on.
yeah, of
Yeah,
course. But I think that's why
executables are
it's
not supposed to be polyglot between operating systems normally.
Sure.
no, that
But
it's something you'd have to
if you
define at
know
compile
an
time
order
if you
of
can.
system calls, you
Cool.
could use to
Mm.
probe which operating system you're on without messing up the
Oh,
state.
that's a good idea.
So something like
I was
get
thinking
PID or
at the
Let him.
something,
yeah,
you call
I was
that,
thinking more along the
you
lines
get
of
a,
allow someone to provide like a table of syscalls customized for themselves if they want to. And then when they compile the
yeah, that's
library.
sniffdef.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
assembler and linker and so on, they know which platform you're on, and you can find it out at assembly time or at link time. and
Mm.
then define certain symbols conditionally.
But the thing is, if you, I would then have to depend on the Clang internal headers for
I don't know if
those
there's a headers. I think
macro
things like
definitions.
underscore FreeBSD and so on
Yeah,
are
they're
included.
compiler built-in headers, and
Yeah.
I currently am not including them. But there are I think I'm using some of them in my current implementation, so I'll have
Or
to
you make it
double
simple
check that.
flag. So you have to define a macro to select one. And if you give
Yeah.
0, then it just says you have to pick a supported platform, and
Mm.
then you list them off in the error
Currently mine won't
message.
even build if you're not
If
on
you
ARM,
have,
so
yeah,
but yeah, no, that's very
but
good insight actually. I'm gonna look into what you said earlier about
the really
about the
horrible way
QR.
to be too clever by half, which would be tempting to me at least, is
Mm.
to find out a sequence of system call numbers I can safely invoke, which tell me which platform I'm on, and then you
Oh,
can
that's a very nice idea.
like call get PID
That-
on this system, and if I
Almost like
get
a
an
hash
error code telling
something.
me it's unimplemented, I know that I must not be on this platform and so on, and then I can safely test something else until you
I
can
like
tell
that.
them apart. And
The
then
only
you
issue
can
is
have
that
the
if you did
polyglot
the wrong,
executable,
yeah,
except
if you
that
did the
macOS
wrong call,
uses
you're
Mac
gonna hang
O and
indefinitely.
FreeBSD and Linux use ELF, so it already breaks
Mm.
down.
Very interesting. I like the idea.
And
What's the minimum number of system call attempts you would need to identify a system or identify
yeah,
it? No. But the thing is, they even vary based on architecture. So
I do
Linux
it.
has different system call numbers for AMD architectures,
Yes,
which is so
but for example,
frustrating.
on FreeBSD, you may be able to drop sysctls quickly
Mm. Well, system,
via
the ones
system
in
calls.
FreeBSD are easy to find. I know this. I think it's like
Yeah,
this
but if someone, I don't know,
sign.
tries to
Probably
run
got
your
it up in one of my
executable on
tabs.
Dragonfly BSD or whatever,
Mm.
but FreeBSD identifies itself as FreeBSD in several sysctls.
Yeah, yeah, of course. But I think I don't know. I'm just gonna keep working on it. After this call, I'm gonna go back to fixing my bootloader. So
But
Cool.
it's a
we'll
really
see how it
cursed
comes
idea
along.
anyway.
Yeah, no, I think it's been very interesting to talk to you. I think the um, gonna try out the QR thing that you mentioned. See what I can do with that.
Now, you've mentioned rather affordable or previously pre-pandemic affordable hardware and hypervisors. Do you think there are
Mm.
opportunities for educational resources here to, say, learn these things? You're discussing
Oh yeah, do you want me
assembly
to? I
patterns.
could paste some books in the chat that
Um,
related to the Raspberry Pi systems programming, I guess.
and as a computer science platform, that is certainly important to those who have not discovered vibe coding and think that you can just sort of, I don't know,
Yeah, I
fake it till you make it on
can
low-level
do vibe coding, but
programming.
I'm too bad at prompting. But yeah, these
Uh,
two books they're available online from the Raspberry Pi site, and so the Pico it costs me three uh about $5. I don't know the
Interesting.
exact translation,
No
but
worries.
the 02 cost me about $6, and the micro USB charging cable was the most expensive item. It was $7. So
Interesting.
I don't know how the cable is. It costs more than the two boards, but they're very, very affordable. And if you get the second version with the W flag extended, it also includes wireless and Bluetooth, so Wi-Fi and Bluetooth functionality straight on the board, which is quite fun
Interesting.
if you're trying to build some the T projects maybe. Like, okay, it's probably what they're best for. think maybe like making like a handheld Game Boy or something is on there as well.
Let hopefully there are easy to find links for those, but here I'll just give
But
some
yeah,
names
the
here.
Raspberry Pi website has got example projects. They've got technical specification for both the for all of their boards. They've got like everything you really need to know, and the inspiration to start doing maybe your first project.
That's
They
great.
also support MicroPython as well if you're new to this sort of thing. So very, very friendly website. And
Great.
plus they're very easy to emulate and run in like a bhyve or environment. So yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
Before you
MicroPython.
get to MicroPython, did I get your quotation correct? Linux has gone off the whack with their numbering of
Oh yeah,
syscalls.
do you want to see? Let me pull it up. I'll
Sure.
paste the link. And you'll see what I mean. It just doesn't
Okay.
make sense, the
And
ordering.
while you do that, Fuji, you're using MicroPython?
Yes, I am mucking around with it. It's more of a home thing than anything else, but sounds fun.
What's your use case?
Nothing much. I'm just mucking around with like ESP32 chips, and I think I'm using the Pi Moroni chips as well. But I worry that I'm kind of deviating from the core topic here.
Oh, we diverged long ago. However, when it comes to like learning resources, if a commodity big box store available Apple product can be a meaningful development environment plus a few dozen dollars or kopecks or rubles, whatever, of hardware, that's a fascinating angle and opportunity.
Yes, I actually meant to on a related note, right? I meant to read. I think Clara has recently had an article about IoT.
Oh,
I
did
just
they?
haven't.
Okay.
Yeah, did you read about it? I
I
don't-
may have saw it pass by. Let's take a look, Clara.
I let me just paste the link here.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, you know Clara Systems, they are the biggest
I
fans of
do.
BSD. Yeah.
Uh, Click, click. Come on, computer. There we go.
I
Okay.
couldn't find the exact
No.
source code for it, but this is the ARM64 physical numbering. I just pasted in the chat.
Okay. Oh, cool. Thank you.
It's a bit like you might be able to see it just by looking at it. I think it doesn't make any sense how they decided to even number them that way.
Hmm. Alrighty. That's new territory for them. Thank you very much. Interesting. I wonder who wrote this. Oh, A. Perlman. Wait, Alfred? Huh. Interesting.
I ask a question to everyone, like, addressing everyone here actually, I guess. Um, uh,
Yes.
there is project called like Unicraft Nano VMs. I was just wondering if anyone's got experience with running like a microkernel or like like these application specific like mini OSs in bhyve. Let me
That's a
find
new
a
one.
link.
Yeah, please. That's an arrangement of words I have not encountered in my 50 something
Dave,
years.
Yeah, I think that it's like aimed to be like a replacement for things like Docker and like the container based systems. So instead of being like these containerized like images, I guess they are like very lean, no bloat, custom built operating systems. It's specific to running your application, application specific
I think I
sort
think
of
I
thing.
read somewhere something about it, which is
Oh,
like
hello.
VM that's constructed with the layers of a
Yeah.
OCI container image, right? Is that what you're
Well,
talking about?
it doesn't do containerization. It's not like running like a container based thing. It's in
No,
So
no,
I from my understanding, it's like
no, no.
replacement for something like Docker.
It's not running a container engine. What I think I read, and maybe I'm referring to a different project, but I did read somewhere about an initiative to build VM guests, actual VMs,
Mm,
with the layers of a container image of an OCI contain compliant container image. You grab those layers and use them to build a virtual machine rather than a container. Uh,
mm.
rather than a containerized environment. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, I think so. I'm like I just said in the chat there. I'm still quite new to this topic, so I'm probably like confusing the terms I'm saying, but that sounds like what I'm thinking of.
so what I've seen in the research of was like last talking out several years, is there's an interest in something called a unikernel where you have basically a kernel which is also in the same address space inside a virtual machine as your application code, which can be interesting because certain privileged instructions can be useful for implementing, for example, more efficient garbage collectors by using the memory management unit to
Mm,
do certain things with lower overhead. But that are mostly research operating systems. People are tinkering and experimenting with it, but I wouldn't call it production ready. Then there are traditional microkernels, something like the Mac and Hurt kernel or um, Minix 3. And then you have slightly more research slash embedded focused systems like L4,
so
which
this
are
is the
employed in production.
let me send the link
And
to the specific thing that got me started on this rabbit hole. It's
something
called
else even
Unicraft.
small.
Oh,
Yeah,
goodness.
that sounds
Um,
Okay.
likely very
so
And I'm
so
trying to
this is
find
productivity.
not
that ops
like
repo. How
GNU
are they making
hard.
small OSs? Okay, let's try Unicraft.
I think um, Unicraft is a unikernel, not the same type of like microkernel as like hard or like these
So,
like more modular or like the what is it like the L4? I can't remember the exact name.
so
These is like tiny kernels. It's um I think it's more on the unikernel side. So maybe I misspoke earlier and I got the two terms confused. Maybe I was using them interchangeably.
That this is all new to me. Interesting. There've been
I
projects over
I
the years,
don't
but this is
I don't really I'm not a big fan of like the like all the like Docker and container based stuff.
yeah,
So I tried to find an alternative and I stumbled across this quite
hmm.
recently. So I'm still learning myself, going through the projects that I can find. So
Interesting.
without Docker.
Do you know where these folks have their ops command that does the actual build? Because it's a bit marketing
So
without the meat.
this
Let me see.
in their welcome documentation, they claim that this is unikernel effectively with Linux system call compatibility or API compatibility. I assume it means system calls shim. Yeah. So it's a
I
stripped down
I just
operating
posted the
system which tries to
ops thing in the
behave
chat.
like
Thank
Linux to
you.
the one application you deploy on top of it. If I implement fork and multiprocess, then it's in a weird place.
Hmm.
Mm. I think
Sudo bash.
it reminds me of have
Hmm.
uh have you heard of Cubes OS, like a Linux uh
Yes,
sort of like device
Linux
focused
for the
sandboxing?
paranoid.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I think it kind of the way I currently understand it, it reminds me of
There it is.
that sort of on the
Mm,
fly sandboxing of VM environment, but just on a less bloated, more application specific scale.
doesn't look like that to me.
And I
Because
think I still need to learn a lot more.
Cubes uses the old-fashioned Zen hypervisor to
Yeah.
partition stuff. So you have your normal web browser
So
in one virtual
these like
machine. For
Unicraft
your
would still
management
need a
one, you
hypervisor
have
for
the
it to work.
networking one, and
Mm.
Unicraft isn't intended to be used like that from what I see in the documentation.
Yeah,
And the
100%.
implementation is
Unicraft is more
also very
like
much different.
if I need to run a web server, it would be built with the only the libraries and the headers that it needs to run this
Yeah.
web server, and then it would have restricted ports in and out. So it's like in its own little, like basically like a container, its own like sandbox environment, sitting atop the hypervisor, um, unable to interact with the host OS. Um, by separation. It's not running in a emulated environment. It's running atop like a Zen or a bhyve when it's being used as a hypervisor. These sort of maybe the KVM as well. I guess it could fit into that
So a
slot.
large part of the complexity of writing a new operating system is
Mm,
writing drivers for real hardware. And if you only target virtualized environment, you
mm,
have to only support a very minimal set of like a dozen power virtualized devices.
mm.
Like virtual COM
But
port, maybe
yeah, I
emulated
guess
serial
that they
port,
can
Ethernet,
benefit
block
from
storage.
projects like what is it called? Alpine Linux, or these like uh,
No?
minimal these minimal sort of really compatible um, distributions atop the Linux kernel. I don't think they support those. So they can kind of in on the driver support that Linux already has while being
So
portable across different operating systems via
to
the hypervisor execution environment. So I don't
um
know.
to me
I
this
still need
looks
to learn
like
more.
project where someone has a need or interest in getting the container workflow on top of virtual machines.
Mm,
So they want to deploy the applications like you would with Docker, Podman, heck, even
yeah.
Kubernetes maybe. But for some reasons, we want or have to run them in virtual machines. They don't want this double interaction where you have first the virtualization and then Docker or Kubernetes or whatever inside of there. They want the applications directly in dedicated virtual machines, for example, because they have to have this isolation boundary. Let's say there's a regulatory compliance problem that they have to be on different physical machines or virtual machines and must not share a kernel so that they cannot use the container workflow as you would normally would. And so they came up with the idea, how about we write a stripped down kernel to run a single application?
Yeah, no, that sounds exactly like
And
exactly
then
like how I'm thinking of it. I just can't say it as well as that.
the more complicated and specialized way is for something like OCaml, there's Mirage OS, which is an operating
Mm,
system written in a functional high-level language, for most
mm.
of it at least. And then you could
When you say
take
that
your
it's written in
OCaml
OCaml, did you
application
say?
code and compile it all in a bootable image, and you boot that in a virtual machine. And you
Also, you
write
boot
in a
directly into
language
the
where
execution
basically
environment.
your kernel becomes a library you put in your application and you compile into a bootable image.
Very interesting.
You may even run all your code effectively in kernel mode, and you rely on the compiler's language security for some
And
functional level languages.
you just have to ensure that the kernel is sandboxed in that case, do you?
The kernel is supposed to run in a virtual machine, but it's part of your
Okay,
application, just like a statically linked binary would include this C
that's
library.
interesting. Yeah,
Um, that's a traditional unicorn. What I'm reading here looks like they're keeping the kernel user space boundary and are doing something similar to what FreeBSD's Linux compatibility kernel module does. They're
yeah.
implementing the Linux system call ABI
Mm,
because that's the one stable ABI in the Linux ecosystem so that you can take Linux application with minimal changes and compile them. And then you have
mm,
maybe still a disk image, but it contains a bootloader, a kernel, and then that kernel boots into the next stage, which happens to be your application. But your
yeah.
application is still written, assuming that it has a libc, in this case, I think Moozle,
Yeah,
instead
well,
of
I think
glulibc.
if you didn't want a libc, you wouldn't need it to. I think the idea is that it is like
Yeah.
strictly only what is needed to link with or be included in the binary itself. So if you needed
There,
the networking stack, you would need to link with all of that and install any dependencies. I think one thing that I think I read on their site was they like to use things like the infrastructure as code sort of uh,
fits perfectly in
setups
this,
to define like a reproducible sort of like
but
how a
it's
container image works. Like you have your like setup code to make sure that wherever it's being run, it can have the same dependencies. So I think that's I think you're right on the money there. They're definitely using this like stripped down kernel and patching in whatever they need to boot from the kernel, well not boot to load from the kernel into what would have been like a protecting the user space, but is now just a binary.
do we have any other topics before anyone else has to drop off?
Ah. So I did want to point out that, Harry, you can strip down FreeBSD with its build options, and I've been pursuing that for years and put it in BSD, and you can find that link in the chat and the document.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Because whenever you talk about small VMs and small machines and small everything, it's like, well, doesn't your OS accommodate that in some way? And you should simply configure it accordingly and use only Saver.io drivers and not some Chelsea-O NIC driver because you may never be using it, blah, blah, blah. So there's my highly biased opinion
It
on that.
looked
Thank you.
it
Yes,
looked
sir.
like what he's talking about though, from I've just been kind of skimming through it,
Sure.
is they're actually using like a specialized compiler that goes through, identifies any dead code and just automatically strips it.
Oh, which is a valid topic all its own, regardless of your like use case. But do continue.
I mean, that's all I've got. I've just been
Casual.
looking at some of the documentation or some of the information I've been finding, doing a quick search while we've been talking, or while you guys have been
Oh, do you have
talking.
any juicy
I,
links related to that?
uh, just the Wikipedia page.
Wikipedia page. I'll drop it in. And you point out the debugging becomes what? Increasingly difficult as you get smaller and smaller, I trust. Well, now.
So if
I
you
think
take
you're
it to
right
the
there.
extreme that you have the unikernel with your web server and nothing else is a virtual machine, if there's a problem, good luck debugging that. You have to treat it like kernel debugging, where you attach
Mm.
an external kernel debugger, GDB, extended remote, something, like you would debug a microcontroller running bare metal.
I think
And then
maybe
even then you will find that sometimes stuff you find on microcontrollers is not implemented or not working when documented. And
I
you can't
think
just drop
something
in a
that they
shell
go
and
for.
run your normal debugging tools like you would on BSD or Linux systems. Also Solaris. Fu, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know there's a lot of chatter. I mean, conversation. There's a lot of discussion around like smaller VMs, cubes OS, nano VMs, and my question is like, if Jails is running well, and I'm actually mucking around with Podman as we chat, right? If Jails is actually running well, what is the use case for a micro VM in the FreeBSD world?
So the conceptual difference between operating system level and hardware level virtualization is the difference. So jails or Solaris zones or Linux, different flavors of containers, virtualize on the system call level. So you run on a shared kernel with all the efficiency and attack surface that implies. With hardware virtualization, you virtualize the hardware you're running on and are emulating peripherals like disk drives, network interface cards, serial ports. But the interface is now the hypercall interface and the one provided by your hardware virtualization. So stuff like nested page tables, which hopefully are implemented correctly in microcode. And this means that you target what does it mean to do this and that, memory mapped IO instruction, or just a store to a magic address in physical memory. Whereas on a jail, you run a system call against the kernel, and the kernel knows that the thread which did the system call is in a jail and, for example, limits what it can see in the file system or what it's allowed to do on the network stack side.
I get it, but
Or a more
this is just a
or
generic VM versus jail kind of a description, right? What's so special about micro VM that makes it a better solution than jails, a better solution
or a
than
more
VM?
direct answer to your question, if jails are working for what you're doing, use them.
Keep using them.
I think it's all about the use
So the
case.
micro
Yeah.
part here is that the people wanting to use this kind of technology, these unikernels, extremely slim nanokernels, and library kernels, or however you want to call them, for some reason they want to have virtual machines as the interface they're talking to, but they don't want to manage an additional full operating system. They want to manage an additional instance of an application, not one more Linux system which could do anything. So the idea is that you want to treat it as a virtual machine, but not as an operating system, but as an application. So your hypervisor becomes kind of your resource sharing interface.
So
In a
if
lot of
I
ways, this is very old-fashioned, like you would do on a mainframe, where you partition the system and then run batch workloads in one virtual machine and interactive workloads with another operating system, potentially in another partition of your big mainframe. And now we have completed another round in the circle of technology.
can I understand it this way? Like it sounds like a micro VM is really the use case for it is if you are in a situation where you need to run say a Win32 application, um, a micro VM is a more lightweight version of a VM.
I don't think that's so much the case. I think if you are trying to target micro VM or nano VM, whichever is the correct term, I think you are more focused on not so much I'm trying to run this external application like you said, like a Win32 binary. I think it's more you would design something specifically to be run in that environment, and I think it would more come down to the performance in the execution is probably why you would go for something like that. Because instead of being in a containerized environment or in a jail atop an OS that is again atop a hypervisor, you would be one step away from the metal, not on top of another OS, directly interacting through the hypervisor to the machine. So I think you probably it would be down to one, you don't like containers or that the jails, because otherwise, why would you be doing it? And then second of all,
Yeah.
it's probably a performance aspect to it that may be the most enticing. But I think it is all down to the use case. I don't think they're meant to be generalized VMs to run any application. I think it's more specific, custom made, tailored to the use case application to be run on that one target environment, if that makes sense.
So can I ask this general, like directionally, right? Where is FreeBSD putting its money towards? Because the reason why I'm playing with Podman is because it sounds to me like the FreeBSD Foundation is investing in creating like a parity with Kubernetes, right? And that's dominated by Linux. If you're going to micro VM, it sounds like it's a very I don't know. I don't know whether is that something that we think is a better future for FreeBSD?
So,
Is there a canonical
people have
definition of a
ported
micro VM?
whatever the marketing team
Good
needs.
question.
Okay.
So
Well, I think
some
as long as
people, for
there's
example, want to run
hypervisors, they will be around.
FreeBSD with short startup times, and so there's a FreeBSD support for Amazon Firecracker.
Oh,
This
correct. There
means
you
that
go.
you
Good
can
example.
run FreeBSD workloads with so short startup times for the FreeBSD system that you couldn't use this for something like function as a service, where basically every API call hits a pre-started queue of FreeBSD virtual machines, and you just keep using them like CGI processes.
Mm.
The changes required to do that on FreeBSD weren't invasive or large. It just had to be done, and you had to kind of find out where are the points which give you a good return of investment. Where is the system wasting time during booting? Like, I don't know, giving the bootloader a 10-second chance for the user to hit the escape key or something. Set that to 0. Okay, now we are doing, I don't know, an inefficient sorting algorithm to sort the kernel modules built into the kernel. Okay, use a normal sorting algorithm instead of a dumbed down one which had to fit in the boot code of a BIOS boot system decades ago. Stuff like this. Oh, we don't have to do a bubble sort. Let's do a Q sort because we have Q sort in the kernel. So call the right sorting function, this kind of stuff. And suddenly we had an like order of magnitude or more boot time improvement, and now it works. This is fine. I don't think anyone really wants to turn FreeBSD into this kind of unikernel system. Of course, you can just set the init path to map to your application code and then run your application as init and do everything in one process. It wouldn't be particularly sane to do that, but it would be technically feasible. So I foresee jails to stay around for the long term, and Podman to just be another way than the jail command to manage the existing jail system call interface. And by doing this, we get to join the ecosystem which has developed around Linux kernel so that you can consume stuff like especially Docker files with build instruction, how to package an application, and then deploy the resulting image to a cluster of servers, which is this last step, this deploying something to multiple systems is where the base system jail command doesn't help you. You're only given the mechanisms, no policy or opinionated tools to help you. So yeah, that's my take on it. I don't know what Hans, Alex, and I want to say.
And who of us hasn't pointed a init to be bash?
On Linux, yes. On FreeBSD, not really. I have replaced FreeBSD's init with S6RC. Works just fine. The boot time goes way down, at least as measured from basically the kernel starts init to the XDM login screen appears and is purely dominated by the time the Intel GPU driver needs to initialize the display. I got it down to something like 600 milliseconds of boot time from first line appears on a video to the login screen appears. So slightly more than half a second on an old X220 when I did it. Back then it wasn't that old. And FreeBSD boots a lot faster now on reasonable hardware because of Collins improvements for things like Firecracker and virtual machines. So other slowdowns in the boot process have been removed. So maybe I should resuscitate that service definition set and try again.
I will admit the last time I did it was on Linux, and it was to where someone had set a password and didn't know what it was.
Yeah, for that on BSD, you would set your system to boot into single user mode where you run an init, and then init, instead of running VRC scripts, would spawn a shell. You don't have to run the shell as your init for that in FreeBSD.
Oh, it'll give you a prompt without a password?
If you put it in single user mode and the TTY is not marked as unsecure, you do not need a password.
Okay.
I
So
think one
single
of
user
the
mode,
best
you have
examples
to
for
be at
this
the
is
system console. You could also tell the bootloader to set init to something else by just setting the init underscore path variable in the bootloader, which would then become a kernel environment variable once the kernel takes over, and then the kernel will run something else instead of init. So it's not a attack vector which is unique to running init. But if you run basically boot with -s, because the boot arguments in FreeBSD are passed on by the kernel to the init, So basically anything you can give as an argument to init, you can give to the kernel. It's an argument, and then it's basically handled by the init process, and the init process with -s will just on the system console open a shell without any password by default. Unless the TTY is marked as insecure, then it will require you to log in. By default, the TTYs are not marked as insecure. So if you can boot the system and get to the keyboard or serial port or whatever, you can reboot, enter single user mode and mess with the system unless it's encrypted. Then it will stop at the decryption prompt.
Harry, you had something?
Yeah, a good example of this is the link I just shared in the chat where you can boot directly into Emacs by
Oh, goodness.
following this guide. I think it's a bit of a meme that Emacs is like an
OS.
operating system in
Yeah.
itself,
Oh,
but
boy.
I
Yeah,
think
but
One
it's
they
kernel
don't
short.
have an
quite
editor for
interesting.
that. Oh wait, I forgot.
Can you say
Evil mode,
that?
the Vim mode for Emacs.
I still couldn't get used to Lisp even with the Vim emulations with evil mode, so Emacs was too powerful for me. Too many braces.
Slime for SBCL in English?
That's a superior list integration mode into Emacs for Steelbank Common Lisp.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
Carnegie Mellon University.
I'm quite
Is
surprised about
compiler.
how little is required to actually boot into Emacs. Quite impressive.
Well,
Ah.
you can get FreeBSD down to around that size without losing much for a jail.
Well, and don't get me wrong, this may be humorous, it may be a bunch of things, but for embedded applications and kiosks and things that only do one thing well, that's a compelling approach insofar as this machine can do this, has nothing else. Have a nice day.
Oh, for sure.
This is the way.
100%.
But at this point, you could also use the Lua interpreter as your init. If you build a static Lua interpreter, you can pick it as init. It's not that unique. It's just that if you're an Emacs aficionado, it may actually be a somewhat usable system in this state because, yeah, you just have your editor always open and you do everything inside of it.
Cool.
And people have nostalgia for the Lisp machines. Most of them never got to touch. But if they have an affinity for Lisp, they kind of want to experience how it is if everything is Lisp. And this is
That'll
about
be my
as
nightmare.
close as you can get without getting your hand on a genera ISO and booting that in a virtual machine or emulator.
Mm. I think it's quite easy to see how you can strip down FreeBSD by if you just look at the official like release binaries. You can see them drop from like 4 or 5 gigabytes to a couple megabytes as you start stripping away the prepackaged stuff that makes the base install easy to use. You can really fine tune everything, and that's just with the releases. If you don't go to compiling your own kernel and then like maxing out on removing bloat,
So it
trimming
wouldn't be
down.
hard to take this Linux documentation and port it to FreeBSD or something like that.
Yeah, I might try that. I'll see what I can do with that this evening. See if I can boot into NeoVim maybe. I don't
So
want to
you
see
kind of
any
have to
list.
run the commands. The most important command you may need is this mount dash u dash w slash, which makes the root file system writable. And if you don't have an FS tab, you can use the this.
So can you say that
You
again?
pipe one in
Oh,
from
okay.
standard in, And then you can just emit your FS top equivalent, or yeah, just pipe one into your mount command
Mm,
and or mount dash A to mount all the file systems,
very
giving you
interesting.
something like that temp fss slash temp and maybe
Mm,
your home file systems, load ZFS stuff. There are only like half a dozen or so commands you really have to run to get a file system into a usable state and networking
mm,
up and running. If you rip out all the init system stuff overhead. So basically, IF config interface name up, DH client run,
mm.
and it will do the rest.
I'll see how I get on with it.
So to
We
do
look
that, you
forward to
could
your
just
report next week.
boot into single user mode in a virtual machine and then
Mm,
find out which commands you need to bring up your system from single user mode into something usable in the editor of your choice. Given that Vim has a terminal mode and tons of extensions, you could probably do it in Vim if you're not happy with Emacs or
yeah, I think I might
NeoVim.
try for NeoVim. Maybe that
Yeah,
will enable the Lua interpreter as
yeah.
well, so I can do quite a lot.
And there's
But
BI and
it's
base,
kind
so you can
of
have
a ridiculous
lines.
joke you can pull. It's not really useful.
Well, network share for your
It's an
data, and off you
interesting
go.
learning experience. So
Yeah,
it's
it could be
useful in
quite
this
fun.
regard, but the result is a nerd's toy and not something you can use for meaningful production workloads. It's
No, of
not going to
course.
pay your hosting bills.
A kiosk is always welcome, regardless, if it runs the software you need, then that's a good thing. So anyway, any other final thoughts, topics, ideas, questions, cool hacks? I'm glad we've covered this bizarre road of inquiry because, well, this conversation has to take place somewhere. Well,
Do
I
we
look
have
forward to
anything on
updates. Yes.
topic?
Yeah.
Because we
That was
really went
all
down the rabbit hole.
interrelated. I mean, a micro VM that's built with release tools that might run a single application is perfectly on topic. So now I think we're
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
talking
okay,
about
so
running
some
things in a VM, which is what bhyve is. So
yes, and what something few new users learn about or they learn about very late is that FreeBSD release tools include stuff like NanoBSD, which can be used to turn FreeBSD into small appliances. And this could be interesting for stuff where, you have a small atom system somewhere with limited resources, but you still want to run a FreeBSD system here for one use case. I don't know, maybe as your content
Mm,
cache or as
Mhm.
your DNS filter, VPN appliance or something, so that you could have some kind of virtual appliance with
mm,
reduced overhead compared to running a full-blown FreeBSD installation and then you're basically putting in cloud in it and everything, and suddenly you have a 20 gigabyte disk image. And when you deploy that, and suddenly your SSD is full on your little embedded device you want to run your set of virtual appliances on because you didn't bring a 2 terabyte SSD for your enterprise router for each location or something.
So Harry,
But
do
if you
take a
have,
look at Occam BSD. I've gone down that road and I
yep,
referenced Nano because that was pretty exciting 15 years ago. And
yeah,
like, where
and
here's
with
ZFS. I mean, anyway.
yeah, thank you for the link. It was I'm gonna read
and
through
the nice
the
thing
repo
is
later.
with virtual machines you can run bigger things or different things as you have to. So if you, for example, want to run the Home Assistant distribution
Mhm.
on your Pi or something, you can do it in a virtual machine. And I think so, at least you don't really have to use a full Pi for that. And then when you have that running, you can also run FreeBSD here and maybe OpenBSD there. OpenBSD can be your router, FreeBSD can be your web server, and the bastardized Linux distribution of Home Assistant can control your lights and fans or something like that. And you're still below 10 watts.
Exactly.
So
All the things.
and all of that could run on top of bhyve.
Yeah, I was just gonna say bhyve can operate as the L1 hypervisor on these sort of systems as well.
I would still be a type 2 hypervisor because you run the full FreeBSD
Can it
kernel.
not run standalone on bare metal?
FreeBSD would be, but according to the terminology, type 1 hypervisor would be more like something you find on an IBM mainframe, where the hypervisor, basically the hardware boots into a bootloader, the bootloader boots into the hypervisor, and then you run an operating system on that.
Hmm.
And not you boot an operating system which then starts a hypervisor.
Also, bhyve can't operate the same way that something like Zen does, where you don't need the
It's like
like
QEMU in that regard, that it's running on top of an operating system with hardware
mm,
assistance, but it's not like you have a Zen kernel. You run the
yeah.
FreeBSD kernel, which loads a kernel module to handle the hardware virtualization features and has a user space companion unit. You do not have the Zen kernel, then a get domain zero,
I think if we
guest, which
circle
is
back a bit,
privileged and
if
manages the hypervisor kernel.
I think that could be a very good application for a nano VM, I guess. A stripped down FreeBSD kernel to support only what's needed to run bhyve.
Well, yeah, instead of
Yeah, but
emacs, you run
why?
bhyve, right? I know you don't
But
manage. You want
Yeah,
to
and
manage your Z
then
pool. You want to, do stuff,
you
but
can strip down FreeBSD and still keep it functional and you're talking about the last few megabytes here, and they're
mm,
going to cost you so much convenience that it's kind of
mm,
not worth the squeeze, in my opinion.
I guess so, you're right. You wouldn't get much of a performance gain because you're still running atop the kernel anyway, even
they're
if it is
just
a lot smaller.
strategies. I mean, your use case will drive what is the best solution. Like, come on.
And sometimes you just gotta have a bit of fun.
And if you've got
That's
infinite time to explore these things,
And
great.
that's
I
a
look forward to your
good enough
survey.
reason to do it if you want.
Yeah, there you
Yes.
go.
If you want to have a little bit of fun, go for it.
If it makes you happy. Okay. Who would like the honors? 43.
Like and subscribe.
Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic
Oh,
week.
the
I look forward to your
enthusiasm.
reports. He's on brand. He's on brand. Take care, everyone.